Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, children. Our guest is Joseph Chilton Pearce, a former humanities instructor, author of The Crack in the Cosmic Egg, Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg, The Magical Child, Bond of Power, and most recently, The Magical Child Matures. Joe Pearce is the father of 6 children, he has 7 grandchildren, and he's lectured all over the world. In The Magical Child, you wrote, "The human mind-brain system is designed for functions radically different from and broader than its current uses. An astounding capacity for creative power is built into our genes, ready to unfold. Our innate capacities of mind are nothing less than miraculous." What kind of power are we capable of?
Charlie, there's an approach to that which is kind of roundabout. Recently, now since I wrote that 10 years ago, so much has happened in brain research as to make this almost picayune by comparison. We're really facing one of the greatest revolutions in history in what's happening through brain research. And the capacities of brain-mind structure really is awesome. We're talking about personal power, not the power to build machines to do various things. We certainly have that. We're exploiting that to the nth degree right now. We're talking about personal power and the actual capacity of the brain structure and what it has built within it. What I've been doing in the past several years is taking the work of Paul MacLean, who's the National Institute of Mental Health's brain research person, one of the greatest brain research people we have going, and his so-called triune nature of brain and behavior, the threefold aspect of the human brain system. Taking that and equating it with the work in quantum physics, particularly complementarity theory of physics, and equating the various levels of energy which we find in quantum physics with the various levels of the brain structure itself, and finding the direct parallels in that with the stages of development which Jean Piaget clearly articulated in his 60-some years of research. And what I've found, and I've presented this idea to, I guess, 100,000 people all over the world, and I've really received heavy confirmation from it, except from some of the die-hard behaviorists and all who would like to hang me, I think. But we find that the stages of development, for instance, as Piaget finds these 3.5 to 4 year shifts in brain structure that take place in the first 15 years of life, that each of the stages of development that the child clearly expresses are literally shifts of brain structure itself, and at the same time are shifts into and development of, or should be development of, the various levels of energy which are found in quantum mechanics, which means the various levels of energy found in the creative process itself. Now, this sounds complex, but it really isn't. The actual fact is that the parallels between these 3 major areas of quantum physics, brain mechanism, the mechanism of the brain-mind structure, and the Piagetian stages of development are so blatantly obvious that anyone doing the least bit of homework will just stand back in awe and say, of course, that's the way it is. Then the fourth thing which I found was a direct correlation between that and what we call yogic psychology, that is the 4 states of consciousness which the ancient sages of the East have talked about from time immemorial, and they all parallel exactly. Putting them all together, we find that what's inherent within human development is an awesome dimension of creative or personal power. Then, what you find happening today is a severe, serious epidemic breakdown in biological development of our children. We have, as you know, major studies now that are addressed to the problem of, quote, the disappearance of childhood in America. 70% functional illiteracy among our teenage population, 70% functional illiteracy, and so on. I don't need to go into all of the parade of tragic things about what's happening in our schools and what's happening to our children, the level of childhood suicides and battered children. We all are familiar with that. But at the same time that we're facing this rather extreme downhill slide, apparently, you see, of discord and chaos in our children, we are coming across all the information needed to open up a staggering kind of revolution in the capabilities of the child. So I think these 2 things are happening in parallel, and to me it's a tremendously optimistic and almost joyful kind of thing. And people say, but how can you say that in face of all the problems that we're having with our children? And believe me, I'm called on all over the world to address just those problems continually. So what I'm doing is addressing the problems by saying, don't look at the problem, look at the tremendous possibilities that there are inherent, and let's start and just shift over our whole approach to the children to these possibilities that are built into the system.
I have a theory that's based on nothing other than my observations with my own children. And the theory is the first 6 minutes, the first 6 hours, the first 6 days, the first 6 months, and the first 6 years as the critical times and in those stages. I've never read it anywhere. I just made it up off the top of my head. How close is that to what's going on?
Well, really, I like that. I'll buy it. We find actually, according to the work of Cannell and Klaus at Case Western Reserve University Hospital, two brilliant doctors worked on this for 30 years, cross-cultural work as well as all their work there at the hospital, that the first 45 minutes is really, the first 6 minutes is critical. You'll be astonished what happens in the first 6 minutes after birth. But the nature isn't quite so tightly stage-specific. You can kind of mess up and fumble around a little bit. You've got about 45 minutes, though. And if you don't get the job of what we call birthing instead of just delivery through the canal done in that time, you're into some troubles. But I love it. 6 months, certainly, as you know, in the naturally delivered and bonded child, at around 6 months of age, we have what is called object constancy that unfolds, which is the shift, actually, from the reptilian into the mammalian brain structure in the child. And their behavior and their learning changes dramatically, and overnight, as Piaget clearly showed. And then, of course, by around age 6, we're moving toward, or into what we call the social ego structure, which means moving into the highest of all intellectual process for the development of what we call operational logic. And so you're really right, hitting onto it. Now, Burton White at Harvard said that the whole show was over by about age 4. And I think he's an extremist. I think, though, that probably the die is pretty well cast by about age 6 to 7, right within that period. So I like your time schedule, and you're pretty close from my standpoint.
Let's go back a little bit and review then. You talked about the birthing process. How critical is that, and what does happen?
Well, the birthing process, and certainly all the information now is coming out heavily, that the birthing process is the most critical single episode in our life. And this isn't from just people doing primal scream or something like that, with all due respect to those people. We're talking about very hardcore, actual scientific research. We find that prenatal learning is no longer just a figure of speech, that profound imprinting of the brain structure to its environment takes place in utero, that the emotional state of the mother has a profound effect on the entire life of a child, and in fact, the emotional state of the mother is one of the her pregnancy period is one of the major factors. That's why we find that meditating, that a mother who meditates and who manages to maintain the stability of her system in this biological rhythm, which meditation is. I look on meditation as simply a biological process, keeping the system biologically stable. Mm-hmm. That the meditating mother produces a far different type of child. Why? Because you're dealing with the endocrine glandular system. You're dealing with adrenal steroids and ACTH and a whole raft of things that are controlled through that.
Can we give a specific example of a disorder? I'll give you the scenario, and you tell me a probable result. A mother is extremely nervous, is not really comfortable with the thought of having a child. She's concerned about it. Her parents perhaps haven't been really accepted. They wanted her to have a career, and instead she's pregnant, and she's going to have a baby, which I think is pretty likely in today's world, that kind of scenario. So she's not to use the vernacular, into her pregnancy. Yeah. What result might that have on the offspring?
Well, recent studies that came, now I stand to be corrected with this, but I think it was out of Cornell, showed that prolonged anxiety or stress in the pregnant mother, because of the glandular effect and all the hormonal effects, can seriously disrupt the way the DNA spells out its instructions to RNA and bring about mutations in the whole genetic system in ways which were heretofore thought immutable, which means you can have actual brain damage or physiological damage to the child. They'll be born deformed simply by prolonged states of anxiety in the nursing mother. I mean, in the pregnant mother. Mm-hmm. And there again is why we are finding now that this, what we've always thought of as a kind of an occult thing of meditation, is simply the way of keeping the biological system in its proper balance, and that a meditating mother produces seriously a different child than the non-meditating mother.
The question then might be that if the reverse of that is true, does that suggest that an Einstein's mother or a Bach's mother or any other of the geniuses of the world were meditative or approached that type of state?
That's interesting. I don't know. Look at the studies that were done at Harvard University back in the early 70s at their Center for Child Development, in which they found that 3% of the American child population could be considered brilliant and happy. I use this all the time, and I've been working with that thing for a long time. And we find that the 3% of those children are ones who literally remain in a natural biological rhythm of what we can call attendance to the exterior world and attendance to the interior world, and swinging back and forth between the two, which we do know is the meditative state. We also know these children have the capacity to integrate the threefold nature of the brain structure. That is, they can get 100% entrainment of the brain locked in on a single subject and attend to that subject with total, absolute concentration. And that they then withdraw the concentration of that energy of their concentration from the outside world and shift it to the inside. You say, well, where is inside? Well, let's leave that for now. But they do this on a regular biological, rhythmic basis of swinging from attendance to the outer world to the attendance of the inner world. And Cannell and Klaus found that this must start in utero as one of the many biological rhythms of the brain-mind structure, and is observable in the very earliest infant. This natural swing from attendance to the exterior world and this pulling of consciousness out of the brain-mind structure and attendance to the inner world. And that these are the brilliant, happy children. It's lost in about 97% of the child population. Now, what the in-depth studies on this have not revealed the state of the mother at that time, but you've presented a really good issue. What was the state of the mother during that time? Other studies that have been done in Europe show that the state of the mother has a profound effect on the intelligence that is, during pregnancy, her state has a profound effect on the intelligence of the children.
Let's stay in utero for a minute and talk about external stimuli, the use of music. One pregnant mother listens to nothing but rock and roll, hard, heavy metal type musics. The other listens to more complex musical structures, classical music. Mm-hmm. This is being practiced, I know, by a number of people. I'm sure someone listening right now is going through a similar type experience. Is there a difference? The
work of Alfred Tomatis, a very famous French physician with a very large institute for the investigation of the effects of sound on the body. He's called by industries from all over the world to investigate illnesses in their working populations that will be brought about by a new electronic device, which is producing low-frequency waves, damages the body, and people don't know about it, or damages the brain. And he, among his many studies at that very large institute, I mention that because this is very legitimate stuff. This isn't something off the wall. Found that there was a remarkable difference between the nature and characteristic of the type of music that people listen to. And he found that so-called classical music contained what he calls charging energies for the brain structure, and that a lot of this new stuff that's coming out literally discharges energy out of the brain. That is, it saps the brain of its energy. Some of his claims are really in themselves coming from a highly scientific man, or almost occultic sounding. He claims that the brain is fed by sound, and that the ears prove to be one of the most important areas of the whole body. And in fact, he says the whole skin area of the body is an extension of the ear. And it's interesting, some of the tremendous therapeutic work which he's able to do through sound on the body. So we do know that sound has a profound effect. He got started on this, by the way, when he was studying a monastery, a Benedictine monastery in France, where the monks only slept 3 hours a day. They worked very hard for 12 hours a day. They ate only a few vegetables a day, but they chanted for 6 to 8 hours. And he wondered what the effect of the chanting would have on their tremendous stamina and so on and so forth. And that led him into this whole business of sound as music and the effects it would have. So your question there is really pretty good. There's no doubt, and I'm not saying this as sour grapes kind of thing, but there's no doubt that there is a profound difference in the levels of music effect on the brain, and that the classical is certainly more beneficial than the new hard rock. And I don't say that from a cultural standpoint or anything, but just from Tomatis' studies, because they're very good scientific studies.
We now have gone through the birthing process, and obviously we're going to move real quickly because we don't have as much time as we'd like. We could spend a lifetime literally discussing the topic of the development of the human. You have gone through the birthing process, and now you have that child in the first few months of life outside the womb. What are some critical factors here in terms of the proper development of the human being?
Well, first of all, you have to go back briefly to that birthing process. And here you're dealing with, I think, the most critical thing outside Paul MacLean's discovery of the triune nature of the brain, the threefold aspect of the brain structure itself. And the other most critical discovery that we've had, which should have been blazoned on every headline in the world and was not, every newspaper and was not, that's the discovery of John and Beatrice Lacey at Phil's Institute under the auspices of the National Institute of Mental Health, that there are direct unmediated connections between the central core of the whole brain structure, where all what they call the emotional cognitive loop in the midbrain area, which is where the vast bulk of all consciousness really translates into our awareness. Direct connections between the major function of the core of the brain and the heart thumping way down in our chest, and the discovery that the heart determines all relationship in human experience, that the heart is the main function determining the emotional cognitive loop by which we put together our structures of world and self. Then we put that together with some studies by Whittleston and the University of Adelaide in Australia's medical department, and a whole raft of other things. Can't go into all the nitty-gritty of it. And we find that the infant in utero imprints to the heart and expects at the moment of birth to be rejoined with the mother's, into proximity with the mother's heartbeat. And if he is, that there is in effect a translation of communication between one heart and the next, which has a profound effect on the emotional cognitive loop function of the brain of both mother and infant. And now we have the hardcore reasons for all the work of Cannell and Klaus in finding that mother and infant are joined immediately after birth, and the union of mother and infant after the birth remains intact. That is, if mother and infant remain together, that you have a totally different history, life history of both of them. The bonding function, which takes place, determines all relationship from that point on. Breaking up the mother and infant relationship by isolating the infant from the mother breaks the emotional cognitive loop factor in the midbrain area, activates the lower part of that, which is an essentially animal function rather than the higher level human function, and you have a profoundly different response of mother and infant for the rest of the entire period of history of the mother and infant from that point on. So we find the first 45 minutes of life is the most critical of all, and the mother and the infant, of course, must remain together during that point. So that's one of the reasons why I've said that hospital technological childbirth, as now practiced, is one of the most destructive forces we have, because it damages, and we're talking about biological damage, it damages the emotional cognitive loop factor and the heart midbrain dialogue, as they're now calling it. But to find that the heart is one of the major functions of consciousness in the human being is certainly off the wall, and yet something that all the great traditions throughout human history have told us.
To their benefit, many of the hospitals here in the Bay Area do recommend bonding now, and that is a process that's practiced pretty widely at a lot of the hospitals here.
The change is taking place, thank God, just in time. Because, of course, all your battered child syndrome, the breakdown, in fact, of the social ego structure at age 7 and its bonding to society, and all these spin out, as MacLean says, from the same emotional cognitive loop structure in the brain. Break it at one point, it breaks the whole chain of bondings that take place.
What about a rebonding if the child, in fact, is a part of the father as it is before it begins the development? What about a rebonding with the father? Is there any research in that area to suggest that it might also help in the social development of the child?
Rebonding, I don't know quite what you mean by that.
Well, it's a part of the father, and it's been away for 9 months because it's been in this close proximity with the mother's heart. Yeah. There's got to be some links there somewhere.
Well, certainly if the father is present at the birth, we find that there's a profound difference in the response of the father to the child and the child to the father. But furthermore, we find there's a difference in the response of the father to the mother herself. It tends to rebond the nuclear unit. and to bring about a much tighter family relationship than you have. And today, when we have 50% of all of our families breaking up, we better look into why. And one of the reasons is, again, the emotional cognitive loop. The work at the National Institute finds that the same emotional cognitive loop process is involved in the nuclear unit, what you call the pair bonding of male and female, sexual bonding. And the fact that this is broken up so tragically today, so that 50% of the marriages are on the rocks, and 38% of all of our children are in homes with only one original parent. All of that is, again, a result of the breakup of the bonding at birth. So the breakup of the bonding at birth determines all the rest of this.
Okay.
One of the things I'd like to throw in here right quick, Charlie, is that the meditative state is also broken up during that time, you see. So we find that the 3% of our children that maintain the meditative state are the ones that have somehow or other maintained that heart-midbrain connection and the proper relationship of the emotional cognitive loop in the brain structure. Again, it's a biological process. So what I've been promoting since I discovered meditation through the Siddha Meditation Foundation here in this country, and the profound effects it had on me and my relationship with my children, I've been promoting meditation as the way to heal the heart-midbrain rupture which has taken place in our society, which brings everything back into its proper relationship. So again, we find that meditation is not only a natural biological rhythm born into us, innate within us, and lost in the majority of cases, but it's always available. And so we as adults can kind of on a volunteer volitional level reinstate that natural biological rhythm, and it brings our whole organism back into balance. And that rebonds us with our children, you see, and rebonds the child to us, no matter how old they are, and can bring about some real healing in some of the social dysfunctions we're finding.
In the Western world, we often think of meditation as something that has to be learned, that's a little bit foreign. I think many people look upon it as an Eastern practice, which has a lot of application, not against it necessarily, but not something that's natural. In your writings, you suggest that for the child, meditation is a natural function. Could you describe that a little bit?
We know this to be the case. I mean, this isn't just hypothetical any longer, that there is a natural rhythm, like the 45, 90-minute sleep-wake cycle rhythm, or the 40 to 120-minute shift between right and left hemisphere, the preponderance of weight of attention between them. That meditation, which is an attendance between the midbrain structure of ego in the brain and a shifting to the heart, which is kind of a universal consciousness, even though it sounds rather esoteric, which keeps everything into a proper relationship. That this natural swing, a natural gating mechanism to swing the child back and forth from these two poles of his consciousness, they're born with it. It exhibits from very, very early, I mean immediately at birth, and will continue to exhibit until we knock it out of the child, until the trauma and all the misadventures in his exterior experience literally break up this natural biological rhythm, just like you can break up many of the natural biological rhythms artificially. And this natural meditative state is lost to the majority of our children. However, if their parents start meditating, you see, through that, they will automatically start and give the child the necessary space and the necessary time and the necessary nurturing and protection. The child will recapture their own natural meditative state.
What age and how much time might we invest in it, and how would you go about it if you're going to start from scratch?
Well, for me, of course, I ran across a great meditation teacher, and this changed my whole life. It changed the life of my entire family, because all my family are meditators now. All my grown children are meditators, and it's changed their relationship with their children and so on. But we simply get up earlier every morning. We spend time turning within, establishing our connection with our heart, and then we go about our daily job. The main thing about a true meditation is it takes place in the very midst of your life process. I mean, as my great meditation teacher, Chivilasananda with the Siddha Foundation, says, your job is to bring your meditative life right out into the open and live it in the world. And if we're a lawyer, she sends us right back into law, and she sent me right back into lecturing and writing and so on and so forth. She says our job is to make our meditative state right in the middle of our ordinary life. So there's no retreat to a Himalayan cave involved in meditation at all. This is a natural biological rhythm, and it's a natural biological balance and wholeness of the person which is involved.
Do you start when you have a 2-year-old child, a 6-month-old child, a 4-year-old child? Where do you involve, and I'm not talking about your personal, you've been meditating all the way along before the child was born, but where does the child physically become involved in the meditation?
Oh, meditation has to become volitional or voluntary somewhere around the late age, between 11 and 14. Okay. You see, up until that time, the child is in a natural biological rhythm of it. But then, like all the rest of the processes, they become autonomous. I mean, he achieves autonomy. It becomes volitional. And he must adopt then a meditation practice. But not until then. This is connected with a whole raft of other energy systems that open up at puberty and so on. The one last, because I know our time is going to run out here, Charlie, the one last thing I'd like to emphasize here is that if we look at the tremendous dysfunctions in our children today, on the one hand, and of course if we look at brain research and all the things that are opening up and we see the tremendous hope, the enormous exciting dimensions of the child on the other hand, the one thing I've found is 95% of, this is current research, and it's hardcore research. There are 6 different research papers that refer to the same thing. 95% of all learning and memory in the child take place beneath cognitive awareness, which means 95% of their entire brain-mind structure and all the imprints, all the cognitive structures, are beneath the child's awareness, which means that they are simply imprinting to our states of awareness, our states of consciousness, to who we are. Only 5% of their whole psychic system can adapt to what we tell them to be or what we try to educate them to be, in all of our training. 5%. 95% of them are becoming who we are. So you'll find that the only way to heal the child is to heal the parent and the adult that are the models the child is following. Okay? Now that shakes people up. They want to know a new educational system, a new curricula, a new engineering device, a new behavior modification system to make these kids shape up. The only way the kids are going to shape up is if the parents and the adults of their society shape up as the models the children are following with 95% of the imprinting mechanisms of the brain-mind structure. How can the adults do that? I can tell you the most powerful way to do it is through meditation, through taking time off to attend to their own inner structure and their own inner life, and opening themselves up to a change in their relationship with their life. And that change takes place through the connection of the midbrain and the heart. So meditation is simply a rediscovery of this connection, which is now hardcore scientific research, the connection between the midbrain and the heart. And if this has been disrupted, if it hasn't grown functionally, if it's grown dysfunctionally, this connection between mind and heart, then the way to bring that mind-heart relationship back into full function is through meditation. And that's because of my conviction that the way to heal children is through healing ourselves, and the way to heal ourselves is through meditation.
Are you optimistic for the future? Is it working?
I'm extremely optimistic for the future because I think just as we reached sort of like Prigogine, the Nobel laureate in 1977 in his chemistry theory, but about the time we reach a point of total dissolution, I know that is when this coming together of ancient knowledge and current knowledge will bring about a real revolution in the human being.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.